Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Joe Penza, and I'm the archivist at the Elizabethton Carter County Public Library. We're so excited to partner this evening with the Kingsport Public Library and Archives, as well as the Chapter16.org program of Humanities Tennessee. If you're not familiar with Humanities Tennessee, they are a statewide organization that fosters community and civility in Tennessee through public programs that examine and reflect upon ideas, stories, history, art, and culture. And you can learn more at www.humtn.org. Their Chapter16.org program covers all things literary in the state, and we hope you will sign up for their weekly newsletter at www.chapter16.org. We are pleased to present this online author series in partnership with the Tennessee State Library and Archives and with libraries around the state. We are so fortunate to have with us this evening author Sharon Cameron and Ruta Sepetys. Sharon Cameron's debut novel, The Dark Unwinding, was awarded the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Sue Alexander Award for Most Promising New Work. Her latest novel is the New York Times bestselling book, The Light in Hidden Places. She lives with her family in Nashville, Tennessee. Ruta Sepetys is an internationally acclaimed #1 New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction. Her novels Between Shades of Grey, Out of the Easy, and Salt to the Sea have won or been shortlisted for more than 40 book prizes. Ruta is a passionate person about the power of history and literature to foster global awareness, and she also lives with her family in Nashville, Tennessee. We want to remind our viewers to please submit questions to the event's Facebook page throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many of them as we can during the Q&A to follow. And with that, I'll turn the conversation over to presenters, and I believe Sharon will start first.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having us. It is exciting to be here. It is exciting to be here with Ruta, of course. Hello, Ruta.
Hi, bosom friend. Hello.
So what many of you are going to probably discover as we chat today is that Ruta and I are not just both authors, we're both authors that happen to be very dear friends and critique partners for 15 years now, I guess. It's been a long time. Oh, so exciting. So glad to be here with you. It's always fun to chat. And I guess if we're talking too much, they'll tell us to stop. Why don't we talk first about our most recent books? Do you want to go ahead and start and tell us about Fountains of Silence?
Absolutely. Again, just so you know, because Sharon and I have been writing partners for over 15 years, our dream has been to tour together. And we had a tour scheduled for our books. And then that was sort of, put aside because of the pandemic. So now it's feeling tonight a bit like we're on tour. And so I'm so grateful to Humanities Tennessee and the libraries of Elizabethton and Kingsport for hosting us. Sharon is a native, Tennessean. I am not. I am originally from Michigan, but now have lived in Tennessee for nearly 20 years. And I'm an author of historical fiction. I'm drawn to stories of what I call hidden history, stories of strength through struggle, stories of history and hiding. And my latest book, which I have here, The Fountains of Silence, is set during the Franco dictatorship in Madrid, Spain. So the setting is 1957, and we have an American boy and a Spanish girl. The American boy is visiting from Dallas, Texas with his parents, and at the hotel he meets Anna, who's working at the hotel. And together they stumble upon a secret that puts their life in danger. But here we have these two young people, and they're desperate to communicate, but they're fenced by fear and silence and circumstance. How can they bridge those widths between them? And so I don't want to give any spoilers, but that's a bit of what it's like. And, when I embarked upon the novel and I told people that I was writing a book set during the Franco dictatorship in Spain, there were some people who said, "Oh, Spain, I love Spain. I've been several times. Remind me, who's Franco?" And these names like Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, perhaps these are, dictators or pieces of history that we're familiar with. So with The Fountains of Silence, I'm asking what determines, how history is preserved and recalled. Franco was a dictator for over 30 years. Why do we not know more about this?
And that is something that you and I have spent quite a lot of time talking about too. These exact same things. Well, my latest book is The Light in Hidden Places, and this has been such a different and special project for me. The Light in Hidden Places tells the story of Stefania Podgórska, and Stefania Podgórska was a Polish teenager who was living alone and destitute in a German-occupied city during World War II. She was 16. She had the sole care. She was the sole carer of her 6-year-old sister, Helena. And in the middle of this situation, there's a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and it is a young Jewish man named Max Diamant on the other side of the door who has just jumped from a moving train that was taking him to a death camp. And he is broken and he's bloody, and he says, please, please, Stefania, hide me. And Stefania and her little sister together make the choice to hide Max at the risk of their own lives. And then they choose to hide his brother and his brother's fiance until there are 13 Jews hidden behind a false wall in Stefania's attic. And really these 2 little girls left to protect them and feed them. And that is when there is another knock on the door. And this time it is 2 Nazi officers on the other side, and they say, we are requisitioning your house for staff quarters for a German hospital that's going in across the street from you. And so the Nazis move in. So now there are 13 Jews hidden in an attic. There are 4 Nazis sleeping in the bedroom directly below them, and 2 little girls to manage this impossible situation. But they did the impossible. They chose humanity over hate. They made the choices that I don't think many adults could make. They were just 2 of the most amazing women I have ever had the privilege to learn about, and stand before. As it turns out, I was lucky enough to work on this book with Stefania Podgórska's son, and he took me to meet his mom. I got to meet her in the very last year of her life, and then we went to Poland together, and we sort of rediscovered his mom's life. We met with people who had been hidden in the attic. We met Helena, the little sister, who was just as big a hero as Stefania was, and it was just one of the most this book project in particular, I think, was one of the most life-changing things that has ever happened to me. Actually, it was just incredible, and so I'm just so excited and happy to share their story with the world.
Well, and you are so humble. Not only are you excited about this project, but the readership, has responded, and the reviews are stunning. And for those of you who are familiar with Reese Witherspoon's book club, The Light in Hidden Places is a Reese book club YA pick, which is, imagine the day that we learned that. That was a very, very exciting day.
Ruta cried on the phone.
I did, and I cried because, Sharon, I know you, and I know your first thought. You were not thinking of yourself. That's why you didn't mention it right now, and I'm sort of mentioning it.
Thank you, Ruta.
Your first thought was that this was going to give voice to the voiceless, and that this underrepresented story, 13 Jews above, 4 Nazis below, and 2 little girls in between, that you were going to give voice to this story. And I know that was the first thing that you thought. So
it's been a huge privilege. And as of today, actually, the book has now sold in 18 countries. And so I'm really, and including Poland, Israel, and Germany. And that just felt like such a such an accomplishment. And I'm so proud of that. So
it is an accomplishment. And we also, Sharon and I have to acknowledge that that's not just our accomplishment. When a book is published in another country, a translator, is not just an interpreter. In many ways, they're a co-writer. They take your text and in their own language, they're mirroring the literary technique. If you're using alliteration, if you are using, they are trying to express that in their own language. And so we couldn't do it without these translators. And
imagine being able to do that. I think that is, I'm just amazed that people can not only just speak another language, but then be that fluent enough to take literature and translate it. They have all my respect, all of it.
Same with me. And I wonder what their process is like. Let's talk a little bit about let's talk about our writing process separately and together. So go ahead, tell us about your writing process.
Well, I guess since we're talking together, I'll just back up and give a little tiny bit of our history. So Ruta and I have been bosom friends and writing partners now for, I guess it's more than 15 years. It's almost 16, isn't it?
It is. I know.
How did that happen? I just can't imagine. But when Ruta and I met, the very first time I saw her, we had both gone to our local SCBWI conference, and that's Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is such a great organization for anyone who wants to get started writing for children or teens. It's just, I can't say enough about it. And Ruta happened to be getting a critique from an agent in the room just ahead of me. And so the door was kind of open and I kind of had one ear. I was trying not to listen, but I couldn't help it. And so I heard a lot of her critique. And then the next time I saw Ruta at post conference, a group had decided to get together and form a critique group. We were all strangers to one another, and we decided to meet in a Borders bookstore. That will tell you how long ago it was too. We met in a Borders bookstore, and there was Ruta, and we have been writing together ever since. So I was writing my very first novel. Ruta was writing her very first novel. Neither one of these novels are published. I would love for you to go back to your first novel. I know I will go back to mine, but I want you to go back to yours. But yeah, so we have been writing together and critiquing each other's work really from the absolute very beginning of our writing aspirations. So it is so amazing. I can't put a value on, having someone like you, Ruta, to walk every step of that journey with you from the first time you complete a full draft, from the first time an agent sends you a letter that isn't a straight out no, all of these steps, all of these little tiny milestones in a journey, we have absolutely shared. In it, it's just and
I think that sometimes writing seems like a very solitary endeavor, and of course it can be, and some people prefer it that way. But all the things that Sharon is referring to, these sort of milestones of, I finished a chapter, I finished a draft, I'm going to query an agent now. Oh my goodness, I have a literary agent. Oh my goodness, we're submitting. I have to say, all of that is so much sweeter and so much richer when you have someone by your side. And also then once you have an agent or a publisher, you still have a partner in crime to send your pages to say, is this as awful as I think it is? And to say, yeah, honey, it really is. Don't send that to your agent or your publisher. So one of our other friends, also a writer, told us, you guys, writing is a team sport. And so for any of you who are watching or listening and thinking about this and maybe convincing yourself that it has to be a solitary endeavor, it doesn't and it isn't. And I have to tell you, I learned so much from reading Sharon's drafts. Talk a bit about your drafting process to give
and vice versa. I think that is really where the value of our partnership is. It's not that, I learn and I improve my writing from reading your pages, that is just the wonderful symbiotic, relationship that it is. Yeah. So we were talking about process. So, when I am first, conceiving of a book and first, starting with that German, I'm kind of in that place right now, actually. And so, once I kind of get this idea, and I usually know it's a good idea when I have the urge to call Ruta instantly and tell her what I'm thinking about, which is usually what happens. So Ruta's really, really good at the front end conceptual idea. And part of this, I think, is because she knows me so well. She knows what I will do and what my form is and what, my style is and what I will do with certain pieces of information. So she can very, very quickly see if something is going to work for me or not work for me. And that is the value of 16 years together, actually. I think that's a hard one skill. But the first thing I tend to do, even before I start hard into the research, when I feel excited, I run it by Ruta. And my agent will even say, have you spoken to Ruta? I don't know if you knew that, but she will say, oh, Ruta. So once I get into the writing process, though, I know for Ruta and I both, there's a very intensive research phase. And that is true for me, whether I am writing historical fiction like Light and Hidden Places, or even I've done a lot of speculative, I've done some light sci-fi. My research historically is really almost the same for all of that, because I base everything on history, whether I'm writing in that genre or not, because I think history is what makes fantasy feel so real, when you're basing and hooking in to those things that have been already real. So there's an intensive research process, that goes on until I feel like I've pulled enough together. Once I get a few pages together, enough to get the feel of the book, I give it to Ruta and the rest of our critique group, and we start talking back and forth about those pages. And I have to say, we're not terribly nice to each other, which is what you want. They're not easy on me. And if something's boring, they're going to tell me, and I depend on them for that. I depend on Ruta for that, to say, no. which is good. That's what
but it's also difficult, because that part of the collaboration, it doesn't matter if we're both writing historical fiction or we're very different writers, we're very different people, and how the rest of us in the writing group might approach something might be different. But I agree with you. I think in the end, that kind of feedback really results. It really helps the work overall.
And I think too that, again, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that for a critique group that's just starting out. Right. But we have known each other for so long that you guys know what I'm capable of. And you know what my process looks like. So you also don't judge me on where I am in my process, because nobody pops out something that's the way it needs to be the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh time, and I know what you're going to
No, you know what I'm going to say. I will say this, that Sharon and I are very similar in our interests and everything, but what we do produce for a first draft is drastically different. And one thing I will say, that one of the many things that I admire about Sharon is her first drafts are beautiful. My first drafts are so ugly. But because Sharon knows me and our critique group knows us, they know sort of where I'm going. But I literally will read Sharon's pages out loud to my husband and say, you see this? This is a real writer, right? This is an artist. And then I'm
arguing about this. I'm arguing about this in public.
I'm the carpenter. I'm going back. But it's a really unique approach. But Sharon, do you think accurate to say that maybe I'm an underwriter? My first drafts are a little shy of everything. And your first drafts have everything. So you need to sort of pick and choose.
I think that is probably absolutely true. And I do want, what I'll take issue with, you always say that about my first drafts. What I'll take issue with there is that you will go ahead and give me your real first draft. And I've got such an internal editor going, you know, once I give you what in my mind is my first draft, I've been over that 25 times. You know, I mean, I have that process where I just do it again and again. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I throw everything in on the front end and pare back. And you are sparse and you get the bones down and then you fill in the other way. And we know this about each other. And I know when you give me your first draft, I can see what the bones are going to be. And then I start talking to you about where I you know, oh, let's have some more here. Let's have some more here. And I start kind of trying to direct you where I think, you know, you should have more. And then Ruta tells me, yeah, you don't need all of that.
Well, and for those of you watching, we are clearly pulling back the curtain. We're talking about writing process. We are also going to talk about writing business. So if you have questions, put them in the chat and we would love to, you know, not only speak at you, but speak with you. So please put them in the chat. And I think Sharon spoke about research, which I think our research process is very similar in the effect that both of us can become entirely obsessed. I mean, going down these rabbit holes where the research often, for me, is more fun even than the writing at first. And, you know, I will say, I think this might be one thing that's different, but Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong. What I do is as I'm researching, I'm writing, because if I feel something that has a sense of emotional immediacy or something that's I feel is deeply meaningful, I fear that if I research and put my research aside, that when I go to write, I might lose that sense of flow and energy. So I research and write at the same time. But you do a little bit of that as well, don't you? I mean,
yeah, absolutely, I do. And I think also that it's important to say, I say this a lot to other people that I critique or mentor or situations like that. There is no one right way to create a book. And if you got 100 successful authors, you know, on this broadcast and ask them the same question, you get 100 different answers and they're all correct. And not only does every author have their own right way of doing it, but every book has its own process. So I have never had the same process twice, really, with a book and the research. I usually do enough research to get myself oriented and there and to know what I need to hook into. And then as I'm drafting, I will make myself little notes of go look at this, go look at that, so I can direct my research so I don't fall down quite as many holes. Remember that time that we both just ridiculously got obsessed with that bicycle wreck in New York, and we were sending each other those newspaper articles. I'm pretty sure we weren't writing a book about a bicycle wreck, but we couldn't help it.
We couldn't help ourselves. But I do have to comment. It's very interesting that you, and which also will play into the next topic of business, is that you say that you have never had the same process twice with any of your books. My process has always been the same. I am a slave to sort of routine and process. But I will ask you, just because as you were speaking, I was thinking, my favorite part of the process is actually revision. Once I have a full draft and I go back to revise, but is it correct to say that I feel like your favorite part of the process is actually the ideation phase where you're coming up with it and researching? Or
I have to say, I'm with you. I think what we're really saying is that first draft is our least favorite part of the process. I think that's what we're actually saying, because yes, I love research. I love having something down on the page, you know, and then getting to dress it up. it's kind of that revision process is really joyful for me. Once I have the bones and I can analyze what I've done, I can see what's not working, I can see what needs to be better, what needs to be beefed up, what needs to be taken away, and that prettying up. It's like the artistic part almost. I don't know how to describe it. I should. I'm a writer, but
that's exactly right. But that's also in that revision phase is when we're zeroing in on, as I mentioned at the outset, giving voice to the voiceless, or because Sharon writes in multiple genres, giving voice to this particular story. And that doesn't happen at the outset. We have an idea, we have a concept, we write and write and write, and then we're going to land the plane, and so when you can really feel like, oh wow, I might be close to doing this, I might
the wheels are down. I think we both tend to have a moment where we say to each other, I think I wrote a book. I might be 450 pages in and suddenly realize, oh, I think I've written a book. But that there is that feeling of, oh, this is coming together. And sometimes there's that feeling of not coming together, like this is not working. Maybe I should have never started it, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it doesn't matter how many books you have published and all these things we've been talking about. Every time I sit down to write something new, I wonder if I can do it. And I think that everybody grapples, with that self-doubt. I think, actually maybe these 7 books I've written were sort of an accident, and maybe only that was it. I had 7 little accidents over here, and now I'll never actually be able to do it again. And I think everybody wrestles with that, no matter what, no matter who you are or how many times you've been through the process. It's something that you wrestle with. So when you get into that revision process, and Ruta knows I had this happen to me, last year, really for the first time to that extent, where I thought, wow, I don't think this is a book. It was the opposite. I called Ruta and said, I think it's not a book, and we had, and this is where having this kind of writing partner who is also your friend, who has known you for so long and knows, your quirks and knows your capabilities and knows, where your weaknesses are. Having someone like that you can pick up the phone and say, I think this book is wrong. Let's talk for 2.5 hours and tell me and help me figure out, what I'm doing. And we absolutely had that. And I think I'm so in love with that book now, and I think that I have it because Ruta talked me off the ledge that day. So
I will disagree. I'm gonna go back a little on that, because I think that what it comes down to, and first I'm going to say, everyone watching this and listening, you have a story. You might say, oh, but I'm not a storyteller. That's okay, but you still have a story. Mm-hmm. And there is a way to approach storytelling. And Sharon and I are interested in very similar stories, very similar research processes, but we, as storytellers, our archetypes couldn't be more different. We discussed it today, and Sharon, I hope you don't mind me saying that Sharon and I, we have so many things in common. We both come from a music background. We both were involved. We both built businesses from music.
So let's be clear about this commonality, though. I was a classical pianist running a classical piano studio. What were you doing, Ruta? What was your music business?
I was living in Hollywood, managing some amazing people and also some very unsavory people, like songwriters and rock stars and film composers. We were
just the same. It was exactly the same.
But here's the difference that I'm going to speak of. And I learned this from working in the music business, and these are labels that I created. But there are artists, and then there are creative workers. And I worked in artist management. So I was a creative worker who was I was helping artists, people who were so naturally talented and so gifted and needed an outlet. They had a song inside of them and it had to come out, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a business behind that. And when I began very young, I wanted to be a musician, and fairly, well, fortunately, before I left college, I realized that I had no talent. So I thought, oh goodness, well, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I love music and I like office supplies. I'm going to go in music business. I mean, this was literally how I was thinking. And so there's an artist and there's a creative worker. And I bring this up because I believe, Sharon, that you have the artist archetype. If there is a song or a story inside of you, you know what? It's coming out. If the two of us are in Scotland at a castle and someone says there is treasure inside, I'm going to make a list about when would be the most appropriate time, how much gear we need to get the treasure, all of the risks. And when I turn around to ask you, you are inside the castle. And so if Sharon is an artist, I'm a creative worker. I'm thinking about everything. I'm thinking about it very deeply and what is the best approach for my next work. And I might have a list of 25 ideas, but I would never write 20 of them because I just would feel like, oh goodness, no, it's not my place. Whereas Sharon is a true artist archetype where you are an explorer. You're intrepid.
And what we're talking about yourself, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think that is true. It's so, we are so different in that way, but it's exactly what I admire about you. I admire that ability so much because, I do think that you saying that makes it sound like you're not creative, which you are so, I mean, you are just actually as big a romantic as me. You will just go to the practical, and you will be practical and you will be the adult, whereas I'm over here going fly.
All that to say though that there are, for those of you who are watching, there are different approaches, and Sharon and I both had different careers, and we wanted to build a career being a full-time writer. Yeah. We approached it very differently. And, we both got there. So again, just to emphasize what Sharon said earlier, that there isn't just one way. There are many ways. And so we wouldn't want you to listen to these differing approaches and saying, oh, I have to do that, or I have to do that. No, you will find a way to work, to find what works for you. But along the way, if you have a wingman, no matter how different they are, that can say, Ruta, I think you should bust into that castle. And I'm sweating and saying, I can't do it. And on the other hand, to call a friend and for me to say, get out of there right now. No, absolutely not. And to lecture.
Yeah. So Ruta, what we have, what we were talking about today, we were kind of preparing for this talk, and we were like, oh, this is so true. It's like, Ruta, you are the Diana to my Anne. We both love Anne of Green Gables, and so we always, say we're bosom friends. And she's so my Diana. She's pulling me out of the well. Because I ran through the haunted wood. So and that I think is actually why we are such it's a good compliment. I think it's part of what makes us great writing partners, because you don't need someone to tell you about, all the things that you're already good at. You need someone to kind of help you pull up those areas where, that's not, your first approach or your first way of thinking. And I think that is, it's just an invaluable partnership to have.
Well, and I will, if we let them then behind the curtain, those that initial feedback, Sharon tells me, I am not grounded. I don't understand this world. I don't understand the rules. How is this working? And on the flip side, I'm saying to Sharon, pacing, come on, let's go. Shorter chapters, shorter sentences. Yeah. And we work together. And I do have to point out though, Sharon, with your Diana and Anne comparison from Anne of Green Gables, doesn't Anne give Diana Green Gables in the end? I think that when you fast forward through that series, when she's off with Gilbert, she gives Diana and Fred Green Gables. Just saying.
Well, I
really
think
lovely
Anna does end up in Green Gables. It is true. I'm not sure Anne actually gave it to her. I can't remember. We'll have to go back. We'll have to go back and check that out. But actually, that's not what Ruta and I are going to do. I'm not going to give her my house, and we're not going to live in two separate cities. I think what we're actually going to do is run a literary salon. We're going to be eccentric old ladies and invite interesting people to our literary salon, and perhaps run around Europe and solve mysteries. That's pretty much the life plan.
that absolutely.
Anna and Diana had just gone to Europe to solve murder mysteries. Then that yeah.
It's so true. But again, so here we both are. We've approached our businesses because, again, me, the practical one, the planner, who comes from a business where I was helping these people who were so artistic and going in so many directions, trying to help them focus. When I decided, okay, now I have a business that I've built that's successful, or I could change gears and write books about totalitarianism for kids. Yeah, that's going to sell. That's going to make a living. But you can. That's and as crazy an example as that is, I want all of you to know that if you are thinking of a story, and again, I'm very passionate, as you know, about historical, because the studies show now that history is declining as a major. In colleges, it ranks dead last. Some universities are dropping the history major altogether, which makes my heart pound. What do we do if we lose our historians? But I think this presents an incredible opportunity for historical fiction. And I will point out, because of our sponsors tonight of, Humanities Tennessee and Kingsport Library and Library at Elizabethton, I think that Sharon and I are so fortunate, because I don't think a reader runs into a library saying, quick, give me a book about Spanish fascism, or quick, give me a book about a teenager who's hiding 13 Jews in the attic. No, booksellers and librarians and, these literacy organizations, they're really our partners. Wouldn't you say, Sharon, that that's a unique element to writing historical?
Absolutely, I would say that. And I just, going back to something you said that also chilled my heart, if we lose our historians, what we lose is our wisdom. Because that is where our wisdom comes from. And so, yes, that's chilling to even hear and think of. But I think, what I hear from you and what I know is true of me, in what you're saying, and these second careers, that we've started, and a huge left turn, in my life. I think the key to that, if you want to make that left turn, if you want to make that enormous change, I think the key to that is passion. That's what has to be there. You have the passion, for these stories. You have the passion for hidden history, for bringing out, giving voice to the voiceless. We have talked about that so much. I think that's what we both like to do. And it works, I think. And here's my Anne coming out strong. It works, I think, because of that passion. Because that is not something that can be manufactured. That is not something that can be created in a business plan. And yes, it's awesome to have a business plan created around your passion, but that passion comes first.
Tell us about your upcoming passion before Joe comes back with the questions.
Okay. I will. My new book coming. I have a book coming in October 5th, called Bluebird. And Bluebird is the book I was referring to a minute ago that I almost lost my mind writing. But now it really came together, and I'm so excited about it. And what I am passionate about in this book is some of the American history that I actually wasn't aware of. And so this is a story of Eva, who is an 18-year-old German immigrant coming to America in 1946. She is leaving one war and stepping right into a far colder one than she left. But she's not coming to start a new life. She is coming to seek justice, and she's coming to seek a Nazi that has slipped the net. And she is bringing a secret with her, and the secret is Bluebird, which is where the title comes from. And Project Bluebird was a CIA program that was begun just at the end of World War II, as we were starting into the Cold War. And it was a medical experimentation program based directly on the horrific medical experiments that were going on in Dachau. So it came straight from the records of Dachau, and it was for the purpose of developing techniques of mind control. And they were not only doing these experiments that were inhumane and horrific and violating human rights, but they were doing it to American citizens, and they were using Nazi war criminals to do it. And it was such a shock to me, actually, to learn that these things happened. And Bluebird became Artichoke, which became the very infamous MK Ultra, which is what a lot of people know about. But it's also about Quakers. Which sounds so incongruent every time I say it, but an incredible refugee program that was being run in New York by Quakers that was in terms of social justice, so far ahead of its time that it's hard to believe it existed. And I think what really, really interested me in this story, though, was the whole idea of taking someone who has been raised in the kind of philosophy that led to Hitler, that led to Germany declaring war, that led to projects like Bluebird, and taking that person and putting them for the first time in a place of unconditional love. And I think what happens when that happens is transformation. And that's really what the book is about. I'm excited about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful discussion. And I think we're going to open up some questions now. The first one comes from Anna. And Anna asks, where do you find the courage to show people your work? How can you trust your work like that?
That's a good question. I have to say, the first time I hit the button to send my work to Ruta and the rest of our critique group, it was probably the hardest thing I ever did. It took an enormous amount of courage, but you know what? I also had that passion. I wanted to write so much, that it's not just bravery. I made the decision that it was worth that risk.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I'm going to ask you to do when you're thinking about, it's such a great question, when you're thinking about your work, I want you to give yourself the courage to fail, right? Because throughout my life, I have failed epically. I mean, we won't go into it now, but I definitely could be in the category of an epic failure. However, I don't look at them as failures, because through every failure I have learned. So in any creative endeavor, whether it's art or music or, to turn yourself inside out, that's very scary. But even if there's a misstep, or if you get feedback that's difficult to hear, after that settles, I promise you, down the road, you'll realize, I'm better and stronger because of it. And I do have to say, though, and I think Sharon would agree, that in putting together people that you're going to share your writing with, be quite mindful of who those people are, and if you do trust them, because I think sometimes if you ask someone for feedback, they'll give it, and they might not even think about it, but it could be, harmful. Or so just make sure that the people you're working with, that you all have a common goal. And sometimes it's helpful if someone is reading your work, that they know that you're going to read theirs too.
I think that's actually really, really good advice. I would advise finding a group of people who are not only writing the same type of book for the same type of audience. So, either for adults or young adults or middle grade, just making sure that you're sharing that broad genre of, age group because that affects pace and a lot of things. But also just having that group of people that are just as serious as you are about writing, not just your best friend that you happen to like who, you know, isn't really into that. I mean, you can, but you know, but I think when you're looking for a writing group, you're looking for a group of serious people who are writing for the same group that you are.
Well, as a follow-up to that, I think I would ask, you know, how important when you're submitting work for criticism is it to not be too married to what you've written?
Incredibly important. You know, I think that we all have to realize that everything that we do in a creative process, and I think this is true whether you're an artist or whether you're a writer or a singer or whatever it is, it's a step in a journey. There is never a time that you were there. Even when the book is published, actually, you know, you're still hopefully maturing, getting better, you know, moving on through that journey. So no, you shouldn't ever be too married to what you have done, because there's no one that has written the perfect novel that should never have anything changed in it. No one's done it. And in fact, your first draft is not going to be great, and it shouldn't be. You know, like what Ruta was saying, giving yourself permission to fail. You have to give yourself permission to write that very bad first draft. Because books don't pop out fully formed. They are the process of work and journey. So the important part, I feel like, is to love that journey. Love that journey of creativity, and love that journey of getting better and better and better, and understanding that you're never actually there. And I think that mentally keeps you from being too married or feeling too precious about the words that you have right that second.
I think it also, though, takes a bit of practice. I saw in the music business over nearly 25 years of sitting in a room with songwriters, some of the biggest, most successful recording artists in the world. And here they were coming and sitting with the songwriter. They weren't insisting on writing all of the songs themselves. They were interested in maybe recording someone else's song or meeting with a songwriter. And I would see one of these, I mean, someone who has sold 100 million albums come in with a title, and to have one of the collaborators say, "Oh, I like that. And what if we," and then they added to it or changed it. And when you see those energies combine and what can happen, of course, you never know until you try. But yeah, don't. I think that if we're too married and too attached, we're denying ourselves the potential, you know, of the growth and expansion on our ideas.
You're stopping the journey.
Yeah, exactly. Interrupting the journey. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next two questions are from Emily and Bridget. They're kind of related, so I'll put them together here. Emily looks like she's about to start a research project and wanted to ask, you know, how do you begin your research when you found an individual or a topic or an event that you want to write about? You know, where do you start? And then Bridget also asks, what are some of your favorite places to go on either the web or physically to what kind of resources do you look at to do your research?
I'll jump on that one first, Sharon, if you don't mind, but only because I know that you said your process differs and mine is always the same. Where I start, if I'm interested in a topic, the first thing I do is research all of the nonfiction sources available. I read, let's say, you know, historical text, nonfiction, memoir, testimony. Jumping on to the other question, what are some of my favorite resources? I read academic papers a lot and dissertations. So that could be academia or JSTOR or, and I read all of these because immediately my next step is that I am going to travel to the setting, hopefully where this happened. I will put my feet on the ground and I want to speak to the true witnesses. I write historical, but set during time periods where our true witnesses are still available and alive. So, and the reason I do this way is because before I travel and sit down with a human being to interview them, I want to have a grasp and a basic knowledge base of what I'm writing about to respect that person and their experience. I use historical records online. Of course, I dig into Ancestry.com. I collect artifacts over eBay, or in this case, since it was Spain, Todo Colección. I go quite deep on this. I go into archives, whether it's presidential archives, national archives in the different countries that I go to. Sharon, what about you?
Yeah, actually, that's not very different from what I would say, because I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying is a lot what I do, which is to start with a broad knowledge of either the time or the event or the era or whatever it is, the setting, whatever it is that I feel like I need to focus my research on. I start broadly. And I would put yes, all the nonfiction that you can find, the best well-researched nonfiction that you can find, but also I would add newspapers into that. I love to go into newspaper archives because that gives me an idea of what how the culture of the time was viewing something, which might be very different than the way the culture of my time is viewing a historical event. And then, the next thing is exactly like Ruta said, primary sources. If you can speak to the people, you need to speak to the people. And Ruta's a lot more brave about that than me. I had to pluck up my courage to feel like I had the right to ask someone, about these things. For Light and Hidden Places, I was so lucky, like I talked about, to work with Stefana Pagorska's son, but also he shared with me her memoir of her time during the war, and that was having her voice from the past, and that was just absolutely invaluable.
And I will, one last thing, the best detectives ever, your best research advocates, your best helpers, librarians. I can't tell you how often we reach out to libraries and librarians, whether that means because we need a book that has to come through interlibrary loan from some remote place. A librarian is going to be.
When I was writing my first novel, the one that's still, in a box underneath this cabinet over here, when I was writing that first novel, me and Interlibrary Loan, we were like best friends. They were like my best friends, bringing me information. So yes, absolutely.
Well, wonderful. And I will just throw out a question that I was interested in. I can remember years ago hearing journalist Sarah Vowell talk about how historians and journalists have it so much easier than historical fiction writers. And she brought up this beautiful story of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson dying on the same day at the same age on the 4th of July. And she said, I could never write that in a fiction book. The reader would get to the end and say, oh, come on. So do you find that you find some things in history that you say, you know what, it's stranger than fiction and it's just not believable. It's not going to work.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I was waiting because I didn't want to jump on top of Ruta, but what I found particularly in this last project with Light and Hidden Places, I had a lot of primary source material. I had this memoir, I had the interviews with people that were there. And the truth was, everything in the book happened. They are true events. There were 3 places where I either added a little something or moved the timeline, and I put that in the author's note. But everything in it happened as it was. If I had put all the close calls, all the things that actually happened in the story, no one would have believed it. And that's the truth. It would not, and it would also be a 1,000-page book, which nobody wants me to write either. But it was stranger than fiction. They should have been caught 1,000 times, again and again and again and again, and they just weren't. But yes, I find that you can't make this stuff up. That's why going into history is so amazing. You cannot make this stuff up. I couldn't have made up Project Bluebird. What do you think, Ruta?
Well, no, I agree. And then, Joe, what happens is, as you know, because you yourself are an archivist and a historian, like, you find these things and they're just unbelievable. And you're faced with a choice then. Do I put this in the book or do I not? In The Fountains of Silence, the book is set in a hotel in the 1950s. The hotel itself is almost like a character. There were so many incredible stories, and some were just these wonderfully salacious stories about Ava Gardner, luring bellboys into her milk bath, or Frank Sinatra throwing his case of toupees through a window, and things like this that were like, so you have to ask yourself, when you come upon these incredible, either funny or tragic or ridiculous or remarkable, what I do is I say, what serves the history? And I might be writing a story, and you know what? Frank Sinatra having a temper tantrum might be fabulous, but does it serve the history of the people in Spain who were suffering under this dictatorship? Sharon might come upon something that is so miraculous, but does that tell the story of these two young girls who are risking everything to save 13 Jews in the attic, or is it an anecdote? And so exactly what you're saying, Joe, it really, sometimes it really is challenging. What do I include, and what gets, dropped onto the cutting room floor, so to speak?
How do we stay directed, so that we're telling the story that we want to tell? And and that's one of my jobs, actually, with Ruta's manuscripts. That is one of the things that's one of my jobs, is to say, to help her decide which things go in, because she has so much fabulous information.
Right.
Well, this next question is for you. It actually has kind of a personal connection. It's from Lisa, and she says, Ruta, I am still waiting to read your latest. My husband, who was a child of missionaries in Spain during Franco's rule, took my copy and read it first. He liked it so much he passed it to his parents. I can't wait to read it and discuss it with my family. How did you get inspired to write about Franco?
Oh, thank you for this question. And that's a good question, because my first 3 books, Between Shades of Grey, Out of the Easy, and Salt to the Sea, were all inspired by my personal family history. And I am not Spanish. I'm Lithuanian American. And what happened was 10 years ago, a decade ago, I was on tour in Spain doing a school visit. And a group of students pulled me aside, and they had read my novel Between Shades of Grey and said, we see how passionate you are for these underrepresented pieces of history and stories. And would you ever consider writing the story of what happened here in Spain under Franco? And my first response was, no way. I mean, what right do we have to history other than our own? And my own response, it surprised me. And then they spoke to me more about it and explained that after Franco died, that the country had adopted this pact of forgetting, and they had agreed to forget their history. And that really intrigued me. And that's what inspired me. And Sharon and I both were considered crossover authors. So we have adult readers and we have student readers. But I can also say confidently that these young readers, they are deep thinkers and deep feelers, and we are writing for them, and we're honored to write for them, and we're honored to work with them. And so in this case, it was the young readers that came to me and asked me to write that book.
And for a follow-up, I'll ask, Sharon, were you always interested in World War II history, or was this kind of a new endeavor for you?
Writing something that is straight historical is not something that I've done in my last 3 novels, actually. So it was a little bit of a new endeavor for me to write about living people. That really created, an extra layer for me. But the story of Stefania Podgorska is one of those things that came to me. I'm a big believer in little things actually changing your life. I decided to write because I got obsessed with a piece of Scottish history and walked past my computer one day with 45 minutes to spare. And I got up 45 minutes later and went, just like Aunt Shirley, I'm going to write books. and that's what I did. This was me just in the early 90s, walking across my living room and turning on the TV. It was Holocaust Remembrance Week, and PBS was playing oral histories of people who were involved in the Holocaust. And Stefania Podgorska was there. And I was riveted. And hearing her story changed my life. She became my hero that day, and I never forgot her, not for 23 years.
Well, I think that's a recurring theme here, the passion you guys have for what you write about. Well, I think we're about out of time, and that's all the questions we had. But I want to thank you guys so much for such a great, interesting talk, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, and thanks to everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Humanities Tennessee. Our books are available if you're looking for signed or personalized books. You can order them through Parnassus Books in Nashville.
Yeah,